time, which is good, but I'll introduce the next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Adrius Plioplys. He will be presenting on artistic explorations of thought, and Intra will be introducing him briefly.
For 40 years, Dr. Adrius Plioplys has had two parallel professional careers, art and neuroscience. He has transformed the artist studio into a neurobiology research laboratory, merging neuroscience with art. In his art, he explores the origins of thinking, consciousness, of self-awareness, and awareness of others. Using many different visual techniques, he metaphorically investigates what it is that makes us human, what it is that makes us social creatures.
Dr. Plioplys has had over 50 individual exhibits, participated in over 100 group shows, and his art is on public display in museums, universities, and private collections internationally. He received major commissions from the University of Chicago, American Academy of Neurology, Brookfield Zoo, Rockefeller Memorial Chapel, and the Blue Man Group. The three-story entrance foyer of the University of Chicago's Stevanovich Institute has been named the Adrius V. Plioplys Atrium, where his LED light sculptures are permanently displayed. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Plioplys to introduce his presentation on artistic explorations of thought. So welcome, Dr. Plioplys.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I take it you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I'm going to do screen share. Let me see. Okay. How do I do this thing here? Whoops. Oh my. To turn this into a presentation, the things are covered on top here. Okay, let me see. Here we go. Okay, do you see the my slideshow?
Yeah, we see it.
It's starting up?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for inviting me to do this presentation. We have this organ in our bodies with 100 billion cells in it, with many, many trillions of interconnections. But we have many other organs in our body too, which have more cells in them, more elaborate in numbers, but they have a very simple function. It's only in our central nervous system that thoughts arise, where consciousness arises. And to me, it's always been an incredibly fascinating question. How does this happen? How is it possible for thinking to arise, for consciousness to arise, for us to develop self-awareness, awareness of others, and with awareness of others, how does societal structures arise? All of this comes out of the interconnections of our central nervous system. So that's been the primary interest, both in my neurology, neuroscience work, and in my artwork. And I've had these two parallel careers going back now for some 40 years. In exploring how our minds work, I do use a lot of parallels in my own life, as in all of our lives. So much of how we look at things, we think at them, how we look at society, comes from our own personal background. So I incorporate that very actively in my pieces. I also incorporate many levels of visual input. My work is visual art, and there's many, many different layers and levels of things incorporated in them. They're very complex. Even though the things flatten out and you end up with a two-dimensional representation, the number of layers that goes into it is really rather a very large number of them. Just like us, we are all very complex individuals. It's not so simple to understand any one of us. There are many, many different things that have happened to us, the interplay that affect our day-to-day thought processes. One thing that I incorporate in my pieces are my own electroencephalograms. And things like this, I sort of kind of bury it into the background and not obvious. But here in this particular detail from that same piece, you have the EEG tracing going up, going down. You see it going up and going down here. And those are throughout all of my works, at least the digital ones, where you see that. So you have my electrophysiological brain at work on display as part of the piece. You also have my physical brain in there as part of the piece itself, my MRI. And now again, these things are sort of hidden away so that it wouldn't be, blatantly obvious. This is my intention is not to do medical or neurological illustrations, but here you have my the blue area here is my MRI scan. This is the frontal area going down to the parietal area. Again, incorporated. So it's not just my own physical brain, it's also my electrophysiological brain incorporated throughout these pieces. Now, underlying the neuronal patterns are usually photographs that I've done in the past, artworks that I've used, are exhibited in different exhibits, and then transformed and used them as a background behind that red piece. This particular photograph is the paths on top of a cliff in Sagres, Portugal, that I visited. In the right-hand side, in the corner here, the right-hand corner, you see the Atlantic Ocean kind of thing. Sagres is the most western tip of Europe. And this is where Henry the Navigator built his fleets. And this is where Christopher Columbus actually learned how to sail. And this is where he walked. So I made the pilgrimage to where Christopher Columbus started his epic journeys here, learning how to walk and dreaming about exploring the new lands. And so putting all these levels and elements together, we got this piece. The title of this piece is called Dreams/Explorations, and they refer to the Christopher Columbus and Sagres, Portugal primarily. And you have all these other elements incorporated here. Now this turned out, the original piece is 5 feet by 6 feet in size. It's on canvas, and it became a rather popular work. The American Academy of Neurology publishes the journal Neurology. This has been in publication since 1951. And it was a monthly publication, then a weekly. And always the front cover was either just a green cover or it was a table of contents until January of 2013, when they did first time that they put a color image on the front cover, and they chose my piece, which is a tremendous honor, to break that tradition. And since then, every single issue has some colorful item on the front of the journal to kind of liven it up. And for about 3 years, this turned out to be the sort of unofficial logo of the Academy. So that's kind of neat. Now, so much of all of us deals with childhood. Well, that's the most formative time of our lives, and it has tremendous impact on everything we do as we grow through adolescence and into adulthood and then into mature life. So these elements appear in my art, and just as they appear in all of our lives. This is my family in Toronto, Canada. My parents were immigrants from post-World War to Lithuania. Displaced people, went through the displaced people's camps in Germany and ended up in Toronto. That's me on the right-hand side. And my little sister, a year and a half younger than me, Ramute, standing there. What you don't see is that my father's actually propping her up. She wasn't able to stand. She suffered poliomyelitis during the last pandemic of polio that went through North America before the Salk vaccine was distributed. And so she had tremendous weakness in her legs and a problem, a disability with her entire life. So I think that's one possibility why I think I was influenced to go into the neurology and the neurosciences. But in terms of the artwork, I grew up in a very strange world here. It wasn't really in Canada, it really wasn't in North America, and it really wasn't, definitely not in Lithuania and Europe. My parents had the idea that they would be returning back to Lithuania very soon, that Stalin and the Russian forces would be pushed out, which never happened. And on top of that, we had the McCarthy hearings taking place, although they were taking place in the United States, not in Canada. But the concept of communists everywhere permeated the Lithuanian community in Canada. And so the idea basically was to isolate from all Canadians because they could be communists. So with my sister, we lived in an extremely isolated world. When I started grammar school, I didn't know a single word of English. And so I remember that day extremely well, crying, screaming, yelling, demanding to be going home. And my parents then bought a television set, and I learned how to speak English from watching Howdy Doody. So if you think my language is primitive, that's why. Anyway, so in this world of isolation is where I grew up. And then eventually then things, kind of loosened up and started socializing with the world around. But this kind of concept of being displaced where you shouldn't be displaced shows up in one piece, which I did as an outdoor installation and then photo documented it and exhibited as a work of art. I went up to Ellesmere Island, the most northerly island in Canada. This is 1980. Took a number of stones and pebbles from there, and then flew to Victoria Island and simply left them there. And I'm sure that these stones are still there. If you went by there to look at them, nobody would have disturbed them. So I'm sort of purposeless, with no purpose, displacing a set of stones from one location to another location. That's the way I felt growing up. So totally displaced, pointlessly in the middle of nowhere. And this piece then was then used subsequently in the background of other works. And then a few years ago, this was transformed into the background of this piece. This is piece, the original here is 12 feet wide, a work on canvas called Non-Isolation Displacement. And again, includes all the other elements, electroencephalograms, brain scans, that transformed photograph underneath here, incorporated in it. And this piece was picked up by a friend of mine, a poet living here in Chicago, who was not only enjoyed the visual aspects of this piece, but also the content behind it. That this piece actually started, in terms of doing this piece, it started in 1980. And it's just been materialized in the past few years. And she asked me to use this piece for her cover of her book, and which just came out. It was released in May of this year. Sandra Avigenite, and an incredibly interestingly titled book called Psychopathia in Lithuanian, Psychopathy in English, which is to me a very, very, very interesting topic to address in poetry. And it's a wonderful set. It's in Lithuanian, unfortunately, it's really hard to share it with you. She hasn't translated it yet at all. And this was Sandra in my house, and the original 12-foot piece is behind us on the wall in my home. Now, going back to childhood, again, I'm emphasizing the developmental aspects of our lives and how important they are in how we develop, and I have incorporated those aspects of it in my own history and in my own artwork. This fellow here is Algis Chisekas. This is a picture I took of him 2 years ago in Edmonton, Alberta, with his wife, Shirley. He was my best friend in Toronto when I was growing up. He was about 2 years older than I, and he was a real troublemaker, serious troublemaker. At the age of 13, he already had a motorcycle. Now, in those days, you couldn't own a motorcycle until you were 18 or older, the same as now. But I don't know how he got the money, how he did. He kept it hidden in a neighbor's garage where the parents were totally lax. But this is the kind of troublemaker he was. Well, one summer, his parents decided, well, we got to do something with this kid. So they put him into an art program. And I visited him very frequently, and I come in, he's working on his art projects in the basement. And to me, it was absolutely unbelievable. He would start with this white canvas, then start putting lines on there, and then more lines, and then start colors. and more colors. And before you know it, you have a beautiful work of art. You have something out of nothing. And this is one of these paintings that I have in my house. Now, you have to realize this is a teenager who's kind of learning how to paint, doing this thing, but this had this sort of profound impact on me. This was the seed of art. And nothing happened with the seed of art in my soul until I was in medical school. Now, as all of you can understand, when you're a medical student, you have all this free time and you don't know what to do with yourself. So I started painting when I started, and I started more and more painting. And this is one of my pieces, which I have, and that I do called Sunday Afternoon Stroll. So as we're going into my more recent artwork that this would be from about 1973 or 74. When we get into my more recent artwork, please remember this thing. I do have some artistic talent, and anyone who saw this piece and the other work that I was doing at that time, were very encouraging me that that I do have artistic abilities. So during medical school, I painted more and more. I started attending art galleries, art museums, reading about art, and it was just the passion just grew and grew to the point that by the time I graduated medical school, I thought that I had made a major error, that I should have gone into art, not into neurology, neuroscience at all. I made an error. Friends of mine convinced me to stay at least finish my internship, which was set up at the University of Wisconsin Hospitals in Madison, Wisconsin. Okay, so I did that, went up there for a year. The salary that year was $10,000. I saved every penny that I could, lived like a church mouse, and then I dropped out of medicine entirely, moved to the East Coast and started doing my art full-time. No, just forget medicine entirely. I started with oil painting, but very quickly then transitioned into other things. I got fascinated with conceptual art. I started doing installation pieces using windows, doors, sound systems, light systems. When you think of this as the late 1970s, what I was doing then is very, very contemporary right now in terms of approaching artistic issues. And mirror systems. And so some of these pieces have survived from those days. And these are three mirror portraits that I did in the entranceway to my house. And if you look in these portraits, you see yourself reflected in the mirror strips that I created. And these are the people that had a profound influence in my artwork. It's not visual artists, actually, but these are literary figures. The one on the left is Franz Kafka. Then you have Fyodor Dostoevsky and Samuel Beckett. So the antecedents of a lot of the conceptual aspects of my art come from a literary tradition. And I certainly don't deny the visual tradition too. It's certainly very, very evident in my artwork. Now with Samuel Beckett, I was able to correspond with him. I had a collaborative project I proposed to him that he was interested in. At that time, he wrote back and said that he was a little bit overwhelmed with projects, couldn't do it, and then time went on and he passed away. So that nothing really happened with that collaboration. Now, things were going very well doing art. One of my large-scale mirror installation pieces was exhibited at the National Museum of American Art in Washington, D.C., one of the Smithsonian museums. I had a number of individual art exhibits, very nice write-ups in the press, some major articles in the newspapers on the East Coast, and even had a chance to meet a fellow called Ivan Karp. He's the fellow in this picture standing in the center. This picture was taken in the late 1960s. He was the assistant to Leo Castelli. And the Leo Castelli Gallery was the #1 contemporary art gallery in New York in the 60s. And it launched the careers of all the biggest names in the U.S. contemporary art world. The fellow sitting here on the right-hand side, you probably recognize him, is Andy Warhol. So Ivan Karp launched the careers of Andy Warhol, but not only his, but people like Rauschenberg, Lichtenstein, Jasper Johns, people people whose work is in every single major contemporary art museum in the world. Was Ivan Karp's discovery. And this is a portrait of Ivan Karp done by Andy Warhol. He was just a constant cigar smoker. Now, I don't know how I was able to, but I was able to get in to see him in his gallery. He had left in late 70s already, left Leo Castelli, set up his own art gallery, OK Harris, in the Soho district of New York. And I was able to see him for a full half hour. People like celebrities like this, you don't meet them. I don't know how that happened, but successful. He looked at my slides, we talked about, explained to him what I was doing with installation works. And his comment was, this is the most original artwork I have ever seen. Now, this is the guy who's launched a career, Andy Warhol, Lichtenstein, Roth, all these people. This is the most original artwork I've ever seen. Oh, that's a tremendous, tremendous compliment. So things were going well. The start was going very, very well. But there was something else brewing in me, a tremendous sense of guilt. And the sense of guilt is that I went to medical school with the purpose of learning neurology, learning the neurosciences, and using my neurology abilities to help people. Now here I am, indulging my artistic desires full time, being fairly successful at it, but I'm not helping anybody. I'm just really helping myself. And I started feeling more and more guilty. There's a parable of Jesus saying that you don't take a lit candle and put it under a bushel basket. Well, that's exactly what I was doing. I was taking my talent and simply hiding it away. And I thought that was just not acceptable. And then I realized that I made a fundamental error. And the fundamental error was, it's not necessary to look at art and medicine as two different worlds. It's not, you don't have to do that. There's got to be a way of putting them together. There's got to be a way for me to put together my artistic interest and desires, explorations, with my interest in the neurosciences together. And so I contacted people I knew at the Mayo Clinic. They asked me, well, when can I get there? And so then I started off with adult neurology at the Mayo Clinic, then child neurology at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, research at Laval University in Quebec City, back in Toronto, and eventually then back in Chicago. But when I went back into neurology, back to clinical, and I provided 30 years of clinical service, which I'm very proud of, and did an awful lot of research. The one thing that during introductory words wasn't mentioned, that I have about 79 research publications. I've received almost $3 million in research grants along the way. And I've had these two parallel careers at the same time. And balancing things out was difficult, and it took a lot of effort, but I was able to do that. So that when I got into this, went back into medicine and into neurology at the Mayo Clinic, well, avenues, well, how do I do it? So I did very many different avenues of exploration. One of the most simplest things was simply to have my EEG done, thinking about different artistic topics. There's the EEG done at the Mayo Clinic in 1980. Well, I'm sure all of you can look at this and tell exactly what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of creative thoughts, of course, obvious, right? I'm sure. Then many different forms of things. This is acrylic painting on paper. Another acrylic paint on paper piece. My personal method of thinking in blue, and what it says there is over and over and over and over and over. Transfer lettering on paper. Do letters of the alphabet contain thoughts? Photographs dealing with thinking and thought, with transfer lettering applied, and we have all of these pieces. Everything that I'm showing you here have been exhibited in multiple exhibits over the years. Thought, a temporary passage of undocumented space and time. Pensive thoughts. And then these photographic images have been used and transformed as underlying images in my more recent kind of digital projects that I've been doing. Now I'm just showing you a small handful of images. The works on paper. There were a very large number of them, photographs, and you can find these on my website. Now I'll be going into just some very specific aspects of things that I've done and accomplished. There are many areas of investigation that I've done that just don't have the time to get into today. But they're on my website. You can search around and look through there. On my website, I try and keep things really updated and current. If you look at the section called updates, usually they'll be called a blog entry, but I call it updates. It's there. And also I do have an Instagram link that you can sort of follow things that are taking place. And some of the other things, it's a little more cumbersome, but you have to click through there. Now, the one thing I'm very proud of is that I have received a number of commission works. And it's one thing when people are interested in your art, that's a very thing, or they buy it, which is very nice. But then when they go to the trouble to actually have you do pieces and pay you for them and cover all your costs, that's really something. Now, this is Rockefeller Memorial Chapel on the campus of the University of Chicago. I don't know why they call it a chapel. It's really a cathedral in size. And in the east transept, that's on the right-hand side here, the two pieces. These are both. This was actually a much more complex installation. There were many other pieces in the west transept and the other portions of in this cathedral. But I'm just showing you this one area here as we are installing one of the two 10-foot by 20-foot pieces called Cosmic Consciousness. These pieces deal with the origins, and as you can tell, this is images from the Veil of the Veil Nebula taken by the Hubble spacecraft, Hubble Space Telescope that I transformed and modified. There are neuronal patterns in there, and then underlying photographs of archaeological sites in central Turkey. So this deals with on the cosmic issue where consciousness comes from on the cosmos level, and on the origin of where Indo-Europeans come from. That was the other aspect of this particular series of work, of Indo-European culture. On the other side, the other piece being installed, Cassiopeia. Now, since these pieces dealt in part with origins of Indo-European culture and archaeological sites in central Turkey, the Oriental Institute, which is one of the major archaeology centers in the world, and it has been since it was founded 100 years ago, hosted a international Hittite conference 2 years ago and requested that these pieces be installed there. So they're being installed there. These are now in the permanent collection of the Oriental Institute. These are, after 100 years of existence, these are the first pieces that of contemporary art that the Oriental Institute has. The Blue Consciousness. This is a piece which is 10 foot by 10 foot in size, work on canvas. It was commissioned by the Blue Men Group here in Chicago. I'm not sure if you have acquaintance with them, but they're really a fun theatrical group. Very, very entertaining, humorous performances that they do, and they're all blue. That's what they call the Blue Men. And this is the first time that the Blue Men Group commissioned artwork. Out of the 5 pieces, one of them was mine. And the underlying image is that I took, which is transformed and included in the piece, is this of a polar bear up on Beachy Island. So I ventured up there and was able to photograph the bear. Beachy Island does have historic significance because that's where Franklin, with his expedition, perished. Franklin was the first person with the ships trying to find the Northwest Passage, and he never made it. And it's on Beachy Island that he perished, and he and the sailors were buried. And again with the Blue Men. So this piece was up there for 3 years and on public display on the outside, and the smaller version of it is inside now permanent display. The Brookfield Zoo requested that I do a piece about immigration. Chicago as an immigrant community. This was a number of years ago, which is an issue right now in the United States, a tremendous issue. And here the piece dealt with why did the immigration take place? And in this case, it's my own family background that I included. Here, the underlying photograph is not transformed. I've left it as is. And this is the farmhouse, the door, entranceway, and the sort of wooden farmhouse and the stables next door. From Lithuania, city in Kazlūras Rūda, where my father, grandfather, all my forefathers are born and raised. So this is where the blood-soaked land that they had to escape from World War II. And there's a very nice written explanation that accompanied it, and this was on display. This picture was taken about 2 years after installation of the piece. The wood fence was originally a very nice, beautiful wood. As you see, it's weathered, but somehow the piece itself survived the weathering. It was up for about 4 years and then taken down recently. I mentioned the University of Chicago campus, and this is, it really is a uniquely beautiful campus in North America. When you go to the center of it, the quadrangles, which is the main buildings, which were built, most of them in the late around, it was founded in 1893, so many of the buildings were open and built then. It is walking through medieval Europe. It really is. The only place, there's no place in North America that has that appearance to it, that flavor to it. It's a fairly large area, the central quadrangle area, very, very beautiful. On the periphery of it, you have this. It's like an ocean liner that was just dropped out of the sky. This is the new hospital that the University of Chicago built and put in there. Of course, you couldn't possibly build something from the style of the medieval styling to match it. But anyway, they did commission a piece, Valley Peacefulness. It's a 10-foot piece on permanent display there. And this uses totally different techniques of transformation. I won't get into part of the Metamorphosis series. The American Academy of Neurology, they built a few years ago new headquarters in downtown Minneapolis, right across the street from the Guthrie Theater. And when you go in there, you'll find my artwork, smaller size prints on all the floors throughout the entire building. So my art sort of dominates the entire experience. And then when you go, and then the large piece is Reciprocal Altruism Shelter, is the title of the piece, a 12-foot piece. And the underlying photograph that was transformed is the shelter that I built up in the Canadian. Again, I seem to love going to the high Canadian Arctic. That's my roots of desolation in Canada draw me up there repeatedly. I built a shelter out of the available rocks. And two people actually don't see it, but on the other side it's open, and the wind would be coming from where you're looking at it from the viewer's perspective, and so two people could actually huddle and protect themselves from the wind. And so that's where the title of the piece is, and it's on display there. This is the current board of directors of the American Academy of Neurology standing in front of it in the main sort of conference room. This picture was taken just before the pandemic hit, and so that's why there's no face masks on, and this piece is still being appreciated. Now, again, there are many areas of investigation that I've undertaken in my art, particularly one about related to memory, how memory is stored, where it's stored. I just don't have time to get into. Those aspects are in my website. You can take a look at it. I do want to get into one area that I found very interesting. And these are site-specific installation pieces that I've done using what I call my thought fragments, pieces of my mind. What I had were leftover canvas pieces, paintings on canvas that I wasn't using. Some of them were damaged in certain portions of it, so I couldn't use them in that regard. So what I did is I took them, cut them up, dry mounted them on boards, mounting boards, and then chopped up those boards into palm-sized pieces. And then I take these palm-sized pieces with double-sided mounting tape and put them on walls as installation pieces. So this is I'm working here on one piece in downtown Chicago at an artist studio there and installing this thing. And you sort of notice that this is just most of the piece as you see it. Is sort of like a mirroring, two individuals sort of mirroring each other. Not exactly, but sort of somewhat like that. And the title of this installation was Mirror Neurons. And as you probably know, mirror neurons probably underlie, or the mirror neuron systems in us probably underlie where it is that we get empathy, or how it is that we get understanding of others comes from. And there's, I think, very solid theories that one of the fundamental problems in people who have autism are problems with the functioning in the mirror neuron system. But, so that was in the mirror neurons that I did. And this was picked up by Oxford University Press, and they leased the use of this image as a cover of this book, Consciousness and the Social Brain, which came out a few years ago, Michael Graziano's book. Sort of a very nice illustration. And nice to have one's art on book covers. My art, as I mentioned, sort of has literary antecedents, and so to be kind of put back into the world of literature in some fashion is kind of neat. This is at the Lubeznik Center for the Arts in Indiana. And here I was dealing with neural development, and in early cortical development, the Cajal-Retzius cells play a very important role in organizing the migration pattern of neurons. And here on the right-hand side, you see two pairs of neurons migrating upwards, sort of together, two separate pairs of them, like sort of interacting face-to-face humans that are going to evolve here, not just individual ones. In this case, we had them actually migrate up to the ceilings. And this here we're installing it. This is an assistant of mine working with me to install the piece up on the ceilings. And that this, so we covered the entire exhibit space that's available, but then also it went up on the ceilings. So it's a very, very impressive piece. Now, I was invited by the Georgia Institute of Technology to do an installation. This is called Hippocampal Memory. The wall in front here is 30 feet wide and about 13 feet tall. And you kind of get the general picture of a cross section through the hippocampus. That's what it was used. And then we have on top here a conduit that goes into the wall. And this is about 60 feet long. And it's encrusted in my neuronal patterns too. The conduit is like memory, flow of memory information in and out of the hippocampus. And this is the conduit where it's taking place. Again, working on installing the piece with my Canadian t-shirt. I'm sure you all recognize these are all the different flags of the provinces of Canada. And then there's the details in the center of this thing. These figures are about 6 feet in tall, human size, and interacting with like they're dancing. And this segment, a separate title for it, I'm calling it, It Takes Two to Tango. And so from neuronal patterns, my thought fragments, pieces of my mind, you put together and you produce social interactions taking place. Now, I took, there's another series of pieces, I'm not going to get into too much, symbols, and which include Oracular Prophecies from the ancient days. The symbols are oracles, they're prophetesses. The most famous one is the Delphic symbol, the Delphic oracle, but there were ones in other cities too. This one is the picture of the Libyan symbol taken from Michelangelo's portrait of her in the Sistine Chapel, incorporated that element. And then in ancient Greek, you have one of the Libyan symbol or prophecy that took a portion of the prophecy here and translated it. And this is now on display at the Lithuanian Center in Chicago, site-specific installation. And it's actually a dual installation, two separate spoken word installations together. This thing, what it says here, and I made it a little bit difficult to read. It's readable, but a little bit difficult because these prophecies are basically impossible to understand. If you read them, they don't make sense. And that was the purpose in part of what these prophecies were written. What it says is, first must be conciliation. First you look for peace. But these are battles. This is a war, fought alone, and you're by yourself. And right now I'm going through a very difficult time in my life personally, so this fits with me, what's happening to me, and probably many other individuals when they're in difficult situations. First, you try peace. You must try peace, but it's a war, and you're alone, all by yourself. First, strong ones, then the weak, then the confused. You start with strength. Your strength then evaporates, you become weak, and at the end of it, you're just totally confused. Why did this even take place? It wasn't even necessary. It shouldn't have taken place at all. So that's one installation, and it deals with my own personal difficulty, but I'm sure it's the same kind of a picture many people, you folks, face or will face definitely in your lives in the future. My poet friend Sandra felt for me and my difficulties I'm going through, so she wrote a poem and gifted it to me. And in the adjacent gallery, I took her poem. It's a short 4-stanza poem, small number of words, but it's an extremely meaningful poem about love and sadness between people. But it ends on a kind of an optimistic note. There's a kind of a kind of a bit of optimism to balance things out, something to look forward to in the future. So I was very grateful that she wrote such a beautiful poem to me that I sort of felt I've got to somehow reciprocate and thank her appropriately for it. So this is what I came up with, this large-scale, site-specific installation of her poem. I don't think many poems have been put up in this kind of fashion anywhere in the world, actually. So I think it's kind of a unique way to show the spoken word. Well, I also made 2 YouTube videos. By the way, I do have a lot of YouTube videos explaining my artwork. These 2 installations have YouTube videos, which are very interesting ones that I worked on. I think they're wonderful. Take a look at them, please. So you can get them through links on my website. And this was picked up just recently by Chicago Gallery News. They do once a week email blasts about what's happening in the Chicago area. And as their main headline, just 2 weeks ago, this was the exhibit of the week in the Chicago metropolitan area. And when we realize we have about 6 million people living here in the metro area, that's something that to be picked up as the exhibit of the week at the Lithuanian Center. So that's really kind of an honor. Now, another area of work that I've done a lot in are LED light sculptures over the past number of years. There's a number. I've made these in different shapes and forms. Some of them are wall hanging. They're rectangular in shape. Other ones are cylindrical wall hanging ones. They're 27-inch in height, 51 inches in height. And they include, what's common to all of them is they include 3 layers of polycarbonate that have had images printed on them, or probably poly images printed on them. And they're sort of superimposed and separated. And the 3 layers correspond to unconsciousness, subconsciousness, and consciousness levels, and that's why I did it. And many of these things do incorporate images of people from the past. In this particular image, what you see here is the different colors. It's actually the same piece as the colors are changing. So you get to see what this looks like, and as the colors change, LED color light system changes, the visual appearance of the people changes too. These are my relatives who were deported to Siberia, photographs of them. 14 of my relatives deported to Siberia, 8 of them were able to survive. And I did a whole series of pieces called Siberia Souls. And also a portion of that Siberia Soul dealt with children. Here you have images of children who were deported to Siberia. And you can sort of make out letters, written words in the pieces itself. These are letters that the kids wrote thanking their relatives in the West for the packages that they received, because if it wasn't for the food and the clothing that was being shipped regularly from relatives in the West, including my parents, people would not have survived the deportation years in Siberia. And then I took and photographed the light sculptures, produced prints on them. And this is one from Siberia Soul's children. And here you do see the handwriting of children's letters. And here's a girl's handwriting. her letter. And this exhibit of pieces currently up in the Balzakis Museum of Lithuanian Culture on public display here in Chicago. I have done sculptures where you have just pure white LED lights without the colors changing. This is also the Siberia Souls one. And this was on display as part of Art Prize. Art Prize is the world's biggest competitive art exhibit in the world, the biggest one. And it takes place in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's hard to believe it, but and it's also the biggest purse. Millions of dollars are available for in terms of winnings. And it does attract international representation of artists. So it's just a very unusual thing. Grand Rapids, in the middle of nowhere in Michigan, where this takes place. Well, this exhibit, Siberia Souls, was in a separate building, separate area, an exhibit which was organized by the American Civil Liberties Union, which was kind of cool. And during the month, this exhibit received 17,000 visitors. So that's really something. If you think Grand Rapids is a small town, 17,000, you're talking, major museum attendance to saw this thing. Now, the columns are the most impressive pieces that I have. These are 3 columns at the Beverly Art Center. As you see, it's the same picture repeated as the colors are changing in them. These are human in height, 5.5 feet in height. And again, this has another year at Art Prize. These pieces were on display. This is the detail in the exhibit. And what was really kind of cool, and this is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but there was a review of this art exhibit with a photograph in a San Diego newspaper, which I found to be very, very interesting, which I came across just by accident. So a correspondent from San Diego went to Grand Rapids just to see the entire thing, and just was taken with this exhibit and wrote it up. This is now, again, back at Rockefeller Memorial Chapel in the Cathedral on the University of Chicago campus. This is 2 years ago. The columns are on display there. This was an absolutely magnificent experience. These columns, as the colors were changing, and in the space, was just breathtaking. It really was. And I'm just not talking, just from a self-centered point of view. It really was. Everyone really enjoyed it. Now, there was a purpose in terms of the distribution of the 10 pieces here. There are 3 sets of distributions here. We have this set of 3 as kind of a small social unit. This set of 3 is another one, and then this set of 3, slightly different organization. This one piece here, that you can't really, if you were there, you'd really be able to see it dramatically. It really is distant. That's the artist. That's a portrait of me. And that's my dream in that particular piece. Distant and separated, observing society. Now, these columns are human in height. They emit light, they absorb light, just like we do. We emit light, we absorb light, we interact with others. We change, our hue changes, the way we respond to things constantly changes. Our aura changes, if you want to put it that way. And just as the colors in these pieces. So these columns are meant to represent humans, human interaction, human society, and the way that they're distributed. And in these pieces, they've become more elaborate, a lot of them. Some include literary things. This is a portrait of Franz Kafka in the column devoted to him. And along with that, there's the handwritten excerpts from the trial, one of his more famous books. Samuel Beckett, and in the Beckett column, there's excerpts from Waiting for Godot, and here you can actually see the word Godot appearing. And then I've taken the same material, polycarbonate, and made whirling pieces. These are 8 feet tall, 4 feet wide pieces that are suspended, and they rotate at 3 revolutions per minute. So there's constant motion taking place, constant movement. And they're sort of semi-transparent, and it's interesting seeing the pieces from one side to the other side. Some of them do include writing and other elements in them too. We're installing these things here at the Stefanovich Institute on the Formation of Knowledge. on the University of Chicago campus. This is one of the original University of Chicago buildings, which had over the years fallen into disarray and needed major restoration. So Mr. Stefanovich gave $10 million to renovate it. And as part of the renovation, they opened up the front of it and produced a 3-story open atrium. And I was invited to figure out how to do an art exhibit in this very complex but very beautiful space. So this is what I came up with in terms of a site-specific installation. 3 of these large whirling pieces along with my columns, color-changing columns. And we're installing them, these pieces, and then here we see here one of the whirling pieces with Beckett and Kafka in it, and then the pieces here, 5 of them. Again, looking down during the exhibit, this came down, well, not even quite a year ago, actually. The symbols, the piece that I did, the symbols here are incorporated in these rotating works too, with the Greek lettering and writing, Now, and these are the individuals who, this is a tremendous honor just to exhibit here. And Makal Serta, she's the left person on the left here, she's the executive director of the Institute. Shadi Bart-Zimmer, she's the founder of the Institute and the director of it. And then towards the end of the exhibit, the university, now this is really a really nice place because the front of the building, when they renovated, made of glass. And so that the color changing lights at nighttime just stands out. You just see them from across the street and across the campus. They just stand out. And it's extremely beautiful in the wintertime when the leaves are falling off and you have the white on the snow reflecting on the campus buildings. Very, very beautiful. The University of Chicago people got so excited about these works that they asked me to donate them, which, of course, that's where I went to college and medical school, so that, yes, of course, I'll donate them. Well, in thanks, they named the atrium after me, which is just an incredible honor. So now, due to my artwork, a physical portion of the University of Chicago now is named after me. Now that's just absolutely incredible. One, it's an incredible honor to have your artwork on public permanent display, which is really neat. But then to have a part of a building named after you is just incredible. So and my name is there in big letters, and you can read it when you enter, with an explanation of what these pieces are. So that's a tremendous honor that was bestowed on me, which just happened. Now, further information about all of these things and other avenues of investigation are on my website, which I invite you to visit. There are a number of things here on the website that I specifically want to mention that you can kind of link into. One thing is the update section. That's the area that I can get into myself and keep updating with information that's taking place. So if you want to know what's much more recent, that's the place to go. The other areas on the website are very difficult. I have to have a webmaster do it for me, and that becomes very complex. So some of the things are a little bit out of date. Update section is there. There's a link to my Instagram, and you'll see a lot of more recent stuff, plus a lot of kind of silly stuff I put on Instagram that I wouldn't put on a serious website, which is just sort of fun stuff. I do email blasts announcements about upcoming events taking place when I'm doing an art. If you'd like to be on them, please email me. I'll be glad to put your name on this on the list. So please do that, and then you'll regularly receive notifications of things taking place. And and I also just wanted to mention there are a lot of YouTube videos that I've made, not just the recent work, but going back, where I can actually explain things of what I've done. So thank you very much for having me and listening to me. I really appreciate your attention. So if there's any questions, please feel free.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Plioplys. We really enjoyed hearing about your interaction between art and neuroscience, and it was very inspiring to hear your story also. So we have a few questions. Kriti asks, we have all read that art helps express our thoughts more easily when we cannot express it directly. So do you have any thoughts on how art can help us express ourselves?
Well, I think, yeah, well, art is an expression of yourself. If you're engaged in artistic activity, you are expressing yourself. So that I don't quite understand the question, you know.
Yeah, I think yeah, I think to answer that person who asked the question, I think essentially Dr. Plioplys explained how art can be a extension of your own persona and your own character. So yeah, I think that's why art is significant. So our next question asks from Alexis, why do you believe that art is so important to the world? Furthermore, why do you believe it's important to the medical field specifically?
I think art is a creativity. You're creating new things. And in the world of medicine, to me, that's incredibly important when you're seeing patients. A good physician, okay, is the creative one. You aren't simply taking cookbook approaches to medicine. When you do that, you have, I really hate these clinical practice guidelines that have become just everywhere. People don't think anymore. It's computer generated and bad medical practice takes place. And I've suffered from that myself. I've had medical challenges and you have these idiotic people show up, you know, physicians, I mean, who just go by the cookbook approach and they injure patients because the cookbook says it without creative thoughts. So creativity, I think, is extremely important if you want to be a good physician. If you want to be a neuroscientist, I think it's even more important. You have to be creative in the way you approach problems. Because if you want to make some major discoveries, you're going to have to come up with some new ways of looking at things. Because, you know, the standard ways, people have already investigated them. To be creative is what's very, very important. So the essence of art is extremely important in doing neuroscience research and in doing good quality neurology medicine. So I think that's very essential kind of thing. In my life, art is very important. I have to do it personally. Other people may not need to do it. You know, if you're just doing neuroscience and devoted to it and you're creative and that's your art expression, that's fine. You know, that's wonderful. That's great. I wish you all, success. But for me, I have to do the visual art part of it. That's just part of that's the seed that was planted in my heart when I was 10 years old by my schoolhood friend, and that seed grew. That was just me. It doesn't mean that it has to grow in other people too.
Yeah, definitely. I think as long as you follow your passion and whatever way you want to express yourself, I think that's the path that people should take. So
Exactly. I agree. I think the concept is follow your passion, what it is that leads you, what you need to do, and only you can know what it is that is. And
we have a question that's more specific for art itself. So what's your advice for exploring new mediums in art? Do you have any new things that that you recommend people should experiment with in art, for example?
well, you know, the world of art is wide open in terms of medium. You know, many different forms of expression exist, massive variation, and people are using all of it. So whatever you like to do is the correct thing. Whatever moves you, whatever means of expression that you like doing, that's what you should be doing. And there isn't any kind of new thing there, you know. But to me, at least, you know, these LED light sculptures are unique that I came up with. No one else has done anything like it, at least, well, not that I know of. And then now the most recent installations of taking poems and using the spoken word in this fashion, that I've never heard of either. So I'm coming up with my own, what seem to me to be unique methods of addressing issues that are of importance to me. But I wouldn't, whatever you think, you know, just to go back to old-fashioned oil painting or drawings, ink on paper, it could be extremely satisfying for you. So that whatever medium, if you're going to do art, whatever medium of expression is of salience to you, that's what you should do and follow that method.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Like whatever people want to experiment with, I think that's the path that they should follow. So Alexis asks, what sparked your interest in art and why did you choose to pursue the intersection between art and neuroscience?
Well, I sort of covered that a little bit. It was that seed that grew in my heart since childhood that blossomed during medical school. I was being sarcastic when I said medical students have tons and tons of time. Usually they don't, but somehow I found it because I needed to, because it had to be found. That seed forced itself in me. But that's just me talking. And then I sort of thought that you have to break either medicine or art, one or the other. And then I sort of realized, after 3 years, some success taking place, that it wasn't necessary, that there should be a way to blend the two together. So that's me doing the way I did it myself. So my own story that I presented here is my own personal travel through this terrain and what's occurred. So that and I'm still working on trying to blend the two worlds together.
Yeah, that's definitely inspirational, like your whole background in art and how you convey that through the intersection between neuroscience and art. Yeah, so also I noticed your tie, is that also one of like your pieces?
Yes, it is. I purposely wore it. I've decided now just to only wear my own ties in a whole series of them. A little spontaneous advertisement.
So Khadija asks, what is the newest piece that you're working on? And if you do have one that you're working on right now, what's the inspiration behind that piece specifically?
Well, the most latest piece just got mentioned as the exhibit of the week, just a week or two ago here in Chicago. That's my latest installation. And I have a policy of not talking about my future projects. And I do have future projects that I'm actively working on. Yes, I could answer that question, but I won't. And the reason I won't is because most of my future projects never happen because something goes wrong with them or I'm not happy with them. So I work and work and work and say, forget it. They're no good, go do something else. So I don't want to talk about, put something out in the public about something which may never happen. So that, yeah, I do have projects, but you'll just have to wait. Get on my email list or follow my website, and when they happen, you'll be notified.
So we have time for one more question. So John Carlo asks, what is your advice for people who want to try venturing into art but don't think they have the talent to do that? Do you have any advice for people like that?
Can you please repeat the question? Quite catch.
So the question is, what's your advice for people that don't think they have a talent in art? Like, how does one start making art if they don't have any prior experience?
Well, personally, I didn't have any prior experience at all myself in art. And I just started doing it. I went to art galleries, studied art, read books, museums, and learned it on my own. At that time, in the late 70s, I really was thinking about possibly going into art school. I thought that's the correct way to do it. And so when I was interviewing for internships, I traveled across East Coast to West Coast, both in the US and Canada along the border, and with interviews for my internship. At the same time, I decided to visit different art schools. I didn't make any appointments with them. What I did is I just walked in off the street and to see what is it that they're actually doing in art schools. And it absolutely stunned me, totally stunned me what I saw then. We're talking like 1973, 74. Everywhere, Canada, the US, every single place you walk into, all that was being done was abstract expressionistic painting. It was the dogma. It was what you have to do. And that was the day. That was the time that this was just blossoming. You couldn't do anything else. And I suspect the same thing applies now in our schools. So that if there are some specific techniques you want to learn, let's say drawing or painting, you have to go to a school, and there's evening classes, there's virtual classes now, YouTube classes for free that you can learn how to do the techniques. But in terms of and then composition and design, there's many different ways now, especially with YouTube, which I love, that you have access to this kind of information to delve into it and just explore and see and work at it, and just plug away at it and see where it takes you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Plioplys. We really enjoyed hearing about your background, which was so inspiring, and how you pursued the intersection between art and neuroscience. So I'm sure our audience is more inspired to pursue the field now. And thank you to presenting your experiences.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm honored. Thank you.
So we'll move to our next speaker now. Our next speaker is Dr. Matt Johnson, who will be presenting on neuromarketing. Matt Johnson, PhD, is a writer, speaker, and professor at the Hult International Business School in San Francisco, California. He received his PhD in cognitive psychology from Princeton University, and his research focus is now on applying the neuroscientific perspective to better understand consumer decision-making. He advises both startups and large brands in his native Bay Area and has worked with Nike as an expert